Prior to any dispute of the Leal was in both its opportunity for constitution. Leal's academic writings have been published in the Anthologies, Xotchitl Flores-Marcial, published by the Press, beginning a career in academia, a guide for graduate students of color, edited by Taylor Francis in the California History Journal, and an upcoming volume reforming Mexican and at the University of France. Dr. Leal's writings have also been published in the journals such as the European Journal of American Culture, Journal of American Ethnic History, and the Journal of California History and other academic publications. Dr. Leal is the curator of the Xotchitl Flores-Marcial, an online collective repository of as a public historian, he was also co-curator and museum educator online, an organization that preserves and celebrates the multi-ethnic culture of the San Francisco Heights neighborhood. And he also made these stickers for
Well, now I get to introduce the organizer of the space. Bilingual poet, translator, writer, editor, publisher, art curator, poster owner, what else? And all of them organized today. But born and raised in the South Central Los Angeles. He's also the founding editor of an editor called Cincesa, which was formerly known as Dragon, and Hombre Lobo, an intergenerational book series documenting paranormal, supernatural stories, experience with mechanics. We're here where she's the owner of the bookstore and art gallery, and the actress Centro Literario, well, thanks. And Padilla is a first generation Mexicana, a daughter of immigrants, who crossed the border from Mexico. Her work has been featured in Daily Times, PBS, El Taco, Brooklyn and Boyle, Cultural Daily, the Berlin Literary Magazine, the Census Review, Where Me Too, and many more online and also free journals. This also has collaborated with the Art Museum, the Forum of Architecture and Design, and has been invited to be a speaker at Casa de las Américas in Cuba and the Universidad Autónoma de Baja California. Most recently, she has an upcoming event at the Vincent Price Museum coming up. So let's ask her when you get a chance. If the Peter Center. Lastly, she has been invited to be on the Pan American Emergency Voices First Round Selection Committee for Judge, and currently she works also for Kid Twitter and lives in the side of Los Angeles. And last but not least, this is just a issue. It's out. The fall 2023. We had a really nice debut last week. Yes. Another party, so we call a party every week. So just give out a round to our
Okay, I'm with the city, and we can say a couple words about Daniel, that really brought us together.
I wish this was, I was actually gonna live feed it, before we got into all this. So you guys don't mind me just doing this technical part, just because I do really want to record when we talk about that. So, maybe just give me like 2 minutes. And you guys can talk about something else.
We can, give us a starting point. So for those that are not familiar, the book really is a book about social movements, right? It's about how we think about social movements, how we understand what counts as a social movement, what counts as activists, and what, like, trying to look at those movements and those moments and those events, not through the lens of success and failure, or you know, rigid sort of boundaries that we try to put on, like, when did it start? When did it end? What did it achieve in, like, a quantifiable way? Right? But really trying to think a little bit more expansively and fluidly about how social movements inform one another, right? Which makes it really hard to talk about beginning and ending, right? When we think about the ways that subsequent waves of activism are informed by what came before and how they are then, right? Really trying to resist the temptation to impose the existing dominant system as how we gauge those movements, right? So, who did that movement help elect? And what legislation was passed that thinking in different kinds of ways? And so it does so through a social movement that emerged in Oaxaca, Mexico in 2006. Originally started off as a teachers union dispute, a labor struggle, right? And quickly turned into something much bigger and broader than that. And then, you know, the book really traces sort of this movement that most people would say had a 5 or 6 month life in 2006. And really looking at the 10 years that followed to think about that movement in different kinds of ways. And we'll come back to that. But it looks like now we're ready to talk a little bit about Daniel, who really brought Eva and I together and was really behind this event taking place today.
I was looking for a couple of years, maybe 7 years. Do you know, he's a poet, he's a wild spirit, he started switching his time. Well, he really touched my heart. He was really one of those people. We're both from South Central, and entonces siempre me decía, you know, because I wanted to be a writer, I wanted to be a publisher, and so it was like the beginning of all of that for me. And Daniel was always like, "Hey, don't cry about it. It's hard. Like it's tough. It's tough to do what you're gonna do. So just do it." And over the years, you know, I published him. He would come here and he would do readings when I had the space around. Well, you know, there was so much there that we were seeing. He did leave me with this manuscript for a book, and he said that's kind of like something that I'm trying to do now. as you all know, like we were all pretty shocked to hear acting and like that kind of, there's just so much pain there, so for a lot of us. Pero lo bonito is that he did, it's so crazy because a lot of people came to me to tell me about him, tell me about his life, things that I didn't know, things that I, because me and Stephanie were not super close, but like the times that we did spend together was really, I think, it touched my heart. So a lot of people came to me to tell me about like his, who he was and like what kind of projects they had going on with him. And one of those people was Professor Mauricio, and he told me that, you know, he was supposed to interview him, he was supposed to talk to him, he was supposed to do things with him. Y entonces yo le dije, pues, you know, let's try to make something happen even after this passing. He came over to the bookstore and he got me a copy of the book, and it was a book that was actually meant for children. And so, you know, I really wanted to bring this event together in his spirit in honor of him. Porque si nos tocó mucho en los grupos, student professors, lawyers, artists, poets, like there was no class done. He fell on the community. So we wanted to hang this up, but I think he already fell, so I didn't want to bother. Pero, you know, we are here because of him. I learned something next. So thank you all. And have anything you want to share about him? You know, like it's.
Y'all can take that invitation and put it up here right now or afterwards. That guy is really the guardian of the they did it together.
Llave, perdón.
So with and so I think for the sort of portion of it, but like part where we're up here, I think we're going to try to keep it pretty short. We have you know, a couple of questions that are very general for our folks up here, and then we'll throw it out to all of you, see if you know folks have any thoughts that come up for you from that conversation. And through that, I think we'll the book, what's in the book, but really that's just kind of together ideas about that you want to think.
Not a lot of people have read it. You never talked about kind of like the context of like how you got into you're thinking about writing the book. I'm thinking of like because it's takes place after the uprising teachers and the uprising. So you know, just kind of like give us a little introduction.
Then to go back to the same part about the movement that started by the teachers struggled to enter into you know this massive you know popular broad-based social that took grassroots control of the capital city of Oaxaca and several municipalities for like 5 to 6 months in 2006, which is really really extraordinary when you like really think about what that means. In the context of the drug war in Mexico, of a highly militarized authoritarian country, much like the United States, where the smallest manifestation of the same is brutally for people to reclaim public space and essentially force the government to flee the capital of the state for 5 to 6 months is extraordinary, right? And so that example, that movement, in 2006 is before, the uprisings in the Middle East that are extreme. This is before the Occupy movements, before really the undocumented movement broke from the more mainstream rights movement. This was before Black Lives Matter. This was before a lot of the movements that we now come to really think of coming out of that, late 2010s, right? And so it was just a really, really important movement. I don't have is one of a handful of states in Mexico that I don't have a family, right? So I wasn't thinking about going to Oaxaca to research. My family in Chiapas, there's some people that work in Chiapas. I started grad school in 2006. I was continue that more human rights. We're thinking about the legacy of these things. Autonomous organizing human rights. So that's what I thought I was going to study in 2006. It shows a few months before I moved to Oregon to start that program, the movement of this advisor who I thought was going to, help me understand and share with us better was actually, it turns out, working in Oaxaca. She was really more based in Oaxaca. And so, she told me, like, this was like back in the day, so this is more like over email, really telling me what's happening here. It's going to be really important. Really big attention to what's happening. There wasn't really coverage in the media about what was happening in Oaxaca. They were really telling us like, no pasa nada, no pasa nada. It's just so like, teachers, ready to ruckus, but nothing to see here, right? And so we just this was like really the time of like in the media, democracy now, that would at a more national level give you bits and pieces about what was happening. And obviously here in LA, the Oaxacan community was the source of organizing of information about what was happening, right? Making sure that those sort of like government narratives weren't were challenged, right? And so it was sort of that circumstance that took me then to Oaxaca in 2007 to study what I thought was a movement that had already ended. Right? That movement had ended. I went to focus on the teachers union. They were the most visible sort of participants. But then when I got there, that's when I started to feel like, oh, okay, this is actually much more complicated than even that narrative, right? Teachers, right? The teachers were really important. I write about sort of the history of the teachers in the book. Like one of the most powerful opposition forces in Mexico for decades. But like any large union movement, right? It's vertical, it's hierarchical. It operates within an existing system, right? And so there's people who were excluded from that, right? There's people who didn't, who were part of the movement in Oaxaca, but who didn't identify with the formal sort of teachers union and the APO that came out of it. Right? There were some new people that was really, the teachers union was like a really strong organizing force within that space. And so then that's what led me down the sort of path that eventually became the book. I'm thinking about like, okay, who's animating this movement and not being talked about as, you know, leaders, right? Or not being talked about as important political actors in this movement, right? And it was las mismas maestras, you know, at the time. You know, there was the young people, it was the punks, it was the gatiteros, it was the hip-hoperos, right? It was the young people who were very much marginalized from society and marginalized within the movement, right? Who they were like, you know, when push comes to shove, that's who I'm organizing, right? It's these young people who are not participating because they have aspirations of, you know, some kind of leadership position, or because they're looking towards, oh, how can we use this to launch a political career? Or how can we use this to write grants to get funding for our nonprofit, you know, things like that. Right? They were there with their conviction and with very little support. Right? They didn't have lawyers. They didn't have people, you know, who were going to help them if they got arrested, right? And so that's really when the sort of project that became the book kind of emerged and sort of that context. So I think I'll leave it there. We can come back to it if folks have more like particular questions, but that's sort of like where the project kind of
I have to think about the experience down on the ground. I think that one of the things that you just said was not being published, was not being written about, was the fact that so many of the people from the movement didn't see the teacher position as a way to come out into a career that will give you consistent regular pay. So the escuelas normales, like super important. All from 1968, you know, when student movements, this is why there was a massacre in Tlatelolco, because the students were saying you can't raise our prices. We're coming from the pueblos. We're coming here to participate in nation building because that was the promise, you know, like the state. So from the indigenous perspective, many of my cousins are teachers, and they told me the things that they had to do in order to get to 20%. Even they were Zacatecas, they were being sent to places where people spoke Ainu, Chapino. They're not being sent to places where they can actually help, even though they're Zapatec speakers. So, you know, in addition to taking a bus, they had to cross the river. Then there was a mule waiting for them. They were carrying all of the material, mostly purchased out of their pockets. They were writing it. No school. There was like a wall and some sort of blackboard, and they would use literally like the action. So teachers in the communities are incredibly exploited because the state knows that one of the things that they're hoping is to, you know, be able to kind of make it in that field. And so my cousins were telling me about what was happening on the ground during the movement and the ways in which they were being, especially women, and all of the human rights violations that were happening that no one was helping with. Like there was no aid, no one was helping. And really young people had just entered like put up normales, you know, they're 18, 17, facing so I think the bravery, you know, with the youth are acting was like palpable, and especially after we went to Oaxaca and my sister could walk around in the city center, there were so many posters, and this is kind of like that. But it was so, the voices of the youth were so palpable in the
then there was like, he's probably like. 13, I don't know, it was like young age, like, and they were like, they were fighting against it. We were fighting, and it's funny because, I mean, it's like, it's a small city, but it's like super active, so you can see like people that they were like, I have like, yeah, like, there's like, my mom is like from the center, so she was all like, in Las Vegas, but the other side of my family was like, they were in Guillermo, so. But that's how things were changing. They were like splitting from basically like all like for the government and all against the government. So that was really interesting, like how you were like thinking. And then there were like, a lot of people that were like really against that. They were like so supportive. I mean, there was a Zotchitl and people were taking food, you know? And that's how things start changing. And I mean, every time there are flashbacks because it's not like they actually work. So yeah, it was like almost like falling down. So the concept like the police, like those they were like going to do like predadas or those kind of there were both of them to start looking for the kids. Some of the kids were like disappearing. Fucked up. So a lot of like morrillos. I mean, a lot of I'm sure you know so están en los tráficos, están los trabajadores. So they were like fighting with the cops. And ellos ahí like they have to move the plane. I don't know. Even like I remember the first time like Bellas Artes estaba en Plaza de Distancia. So we were going to school. My mom was staying on the platform in Zotchitl, and she came and she said, "Oh, I'm going to sleep tonight." Cops and I get so like 2 times before, and they come and start with my stress and a lot of them like mostly like women and where I was going was it was all this helicopters and the teachers and it was like the gases. It was crazy because we had salían los vecinos que empezaron a romper la cartera y nos estaban dando las piedras y were like to the pumps like we were que nos casamos like the ticket to there I was so strange with the elections closest they pass by and yeah, and Salinas but having like the town and we somehow like next to get shot so yeah, it was intense. Everything started organized and now there's like other ways to do things.
So the vecinos, the community, and how can we have, and I guess it's not the dancing. And I'm about the dancing. It's about like the community. It's about how we help each other and how we contribute to like the greater good, like the greater community. And so the vecinos, at least in my pueblo, and then many others that I talked to, las señoras, los señores, they were gathering food and preparing meals for the people who were out there fighting. So, you know, again, this is like out of this like inertia and like understanding that our pueblos have been abused, exploited, just squeezed all of the energy that they can provide to society. And so I think that what you just described, I mean, that word, the children, I mean, I just kept thinking about all of the children who were on the front lines fighting and receiving the blows from the state. I mean, think of how brave the children were and the youth, and like how much that has been undermined by people who were publishing articles in the LA Times or the tourists who just said two stories. One, I arrived in Oaxaca, and not just where I'm from, where I was born and where I was raised, but that's also where I do research. And one of the researchers said, oh, those teachers, that's just like you know that we talked about. And then I'm getting really? I mean, so, erasure of what really went down.
Yeah, because I mean, even if you were like, a lot of people, they like, oh, they can't want to, and they much, it's not like much, like, it's there, they were like, when that happened, it was like 4 hours, 5 hours long, like, and I started doing a lot of like, professional certificates, comunidades, there was just not like, the debates, from Costa, Sierra, Valles, it's more, I don't know, like, it's more.
My cousin was coming from 2 minutes.
It changes those kind of, and the small, and the same, when they were at some, there was not just like, so también era una demostración de la diversidad cultural que tenemos en el estado. So I was like, in how this is like a big problem, like years, hundreds of years. And at the same time, it was like, at the same time that was just happening, it was like, for example, like person would say, oh, they were complaining about los maestros. At the same time, it's like, it's mismo cuando hacen las tiendas, and at the end, they were like, in that one, but that's, it's not that, it's like, we just, el gobierno sabe eso, it's like, this means, and which is really like, the top trying to like take off the pictures. They put a video, like, and it was the video like years like before that event, and it was when they were this video like kind of like, so come to Oaxaca, you see nothing is happening, and you were like, dude, this is because it was like here, they go we're like throwing rocks to the cops, and they after it's like in soccer, and it's not like that. That's more like over there, more with the year. Right now, we're just like, it's crazy.
Yeah, so I would say, like, another thing that that I write about in the book that kind of speaks to this, it's sort of like the two sides of having a place like Oaxaca who's so hyper visible, right? It's like on the one side, it is, it's marketed as this tourist destination, as this beautiful folkloric place for people to go experience a very carefully crafted idea that the government wants to, and that business interests want you to imagine Oaxaca as, right? And the idea that it's sold to people whose image and history and culture is being sold, it's then sold back to them as like, you should be proud of this because this is your culture. And people really celebrate your culture. So a calinda is not the same thing as a matcha the Gallina is a celebration of your culture. And so what a lot of the youth in the book, what they do to the politics is they try and separate what does it mean to be indigenous, Oaxacans, Seattle people, separate from what the state says, right? And so many of them find residence in, a communal anarchist politics, right? And they sort of they reclaim anarchism as an indigenous answer, right? They're like, we identify with anarchism in as much as our pueblos have always been organizing in a way that is anti-state, in a way that is non-hierarchical, in a way that is based on horizontalism and community, on mutual aid. And in that way, we are anarchists, right? And what is anarchist is what we have been doing for millennia in our pueblos, not what some Western philosopher says is anarchism. And so that's an important part too of like what the book really captures. Is that really more radical currents that refuse to be put in a box, right? And so some of them push back on Benito Juárez being like the figure in Oaxaca, right? Some of them embrace it, and some of them are like, no, you know what, we are not doing it. We do not believe in the state, right? We identify more with the God that goes in their own, right? And so they sort of take even that image that the Mexican state has, there's all these official buildings named after the state has transformed, that history. But these activists, they're trying to return it back to the pueblos. And they're like, actually, the Madonistas were anarchists because of the pueblos, not that we are not anarchists. Right? So they're redefining these lineages, this history, and that's really part of like legacy of this. There's now, multiple generations of people that then there's alternative sort of legacy and these alternative genealogies.
I know. Thinking of 2006. Your book does many things that I think we can learn from. And instead of just all these camping, also gives us those to us to understand how to continue organized. And so 2006 is what happens in LA is a big immigrant. And and this will not happen in isolation. We knew in 2006 what was happening in Oaxaca, what was happening in Mexico with the elections. And so this information was being circulated. And I think that in your book, it's the type of approach that was organized. How we have to inform ourselves, like the different communities, like the larger Mexican immigrant community, the Oaxacan communities, right, in Southern California, how they were being informed what was going on, and also how that informed their organizing. And what I find interesting about and important about your book is how we can trace those legacies beyond it failed, but rather what are the legacies? And if we think about Flores Marcial, yes, they started in Oaxaca, and they exiled themselves, right? And we organized Los Angeles, ultimately get out of that, but it was overcome. We can think of this moment of these legacies, and I think that you talked about the more aesthetic kind of thing, that's something that I follow myself. How art informs this social movement, not only in Oaxaca, but how they inform the diaspora and the Oaxacan community in Southern California and beyond. And also, the one thing I like about your book, and I think we can think about, being in this space, how it creates counter spaces. And the counter spaces, I think about in my work, because it could be ephemeral, they can last a day, count as months, years, but they are counter to the status quo. And what are the organizing capacities of the, like, you could have a book, thought here, but also what else can be organized in systems that we create, that are horizontal, that, like our community that created, right? And so I think that that's something that I really find really interesting. And hopefully, like we can talk about that, you, but also like how do we create those spaces, and also those verbal aesthetics, what do they control from the past, and how do they kind of do something?
Yeah, I don't know, Tyler, you can maybe talk a little bit about, like how you saw either the role of art as part of the movement, specifically in Oaxaca, or more generally, that relationship.
Yeah. What you were saying about like book is like it's important because like when they're changing the poems and TikTok, sometimes it's not noticeable in Oaxaca, or doesn't bring like that attention that you have it. And you give it, and when it's given, it's in a way that's not like people that like positive, but it's like the way that it's like presented in the book is like it's like a way to organize and resonate with like Xotchitl saying like how the communities they organize, and they have like another way to like just take you and we can like come together and say this room we can like decide what's gonna happen for everybody. So that's the way that we feel like it's familiar for us. So when it was happening, like going to like help out with the Bacanas, nobody was like, oh no, we were like, we feel like it's enough, or I don't know, we have to go out because of all this kind of because finding out but like for example in our like estaba en Bellas Artes al maestro Shizaburo Takeda. Shizaburo Takeda is a maestro Japanese. He's been in Mexico for specifically in Oaxaca for like 30 years, and he decided to stay in Oaxaca because the large diversity we have. And so we used to like take classes, and we used to like there was some ex convento in those times, so they used to like close the big door because there was a race police might call because they knew that a lot of like a lot of the students were doing like were doing the stencils on this day, so because they were like doing the marches and they were making the stencils. And that's how like all the collective system making it for something like we stole and the temple, it was all like gas, and they were like making the las mantas, and the maestro was really bold. We were like, okay, we have to go to the temple, soccer, we have to start like making art, then we go, con el movimiento. And it was interesting because there was something before happening. It was called which was like they said that we didn't know benefits from that. So that was it was changing a lot because it was later on shifting to like stem cells and all this stuff. But the movement was so they were because it's like this song was fighting there and this song and that was something like a lot of folks cuando eran las batallas like Apple didn't have the leaders. And they were saying like the club is so sad to like take their phone because they were like, yeah, we were like there in this people said, yeah, we were there like you were there, you know, and that's true because a lot of it's like you have to go there and it's like something so that's how like it was happy and then art, and it was like taking over to like visual picture.
It's like in the same of it's like really. I'm kind of glad that they're talking about it, because even recently with the racism, you know, the people who showed up to those workshops, they didn't show up because they were like this year or that year. People who were texting each other, you know, all my cousins were like, we gotta show up, because they need to see that we're here. So they showed up, and you know, the musicians that showed up, they were texting each other. I'm gonna show up with my gobeta, I'm gonna show up with someone else. It's that commitment that we bring from our pueblos that fuels the like a large part of the organization in the movement in 2006. And then that legacy that continues like wherever we are and wherever Oaxacans are, that's what we do. And you can see it, like it's so palpable.
So maybe there was something when you were like it's not like everybody's like it was the space that when you see things like the night was like it was like it seemed like it was like orgánico las señoras tomando la televisión, and that's like it's amazing. So when I was doing this, like we were watching the TV and they were like, yes. And there were moments that came out. Very nice. Feel like involved like force in the world.
I was gonna ask you what you said about already. What I've been seeing a lot, especially going up in the lake. You do y a veces nos vamos creciendo aquí unos años, pues, no americanizamos, pero pues, debajo de Estados Unidos, no queremos conformar a lo que es Estados Unidos, no necesitamos en culturas, en ¿verdad? Ahora cuando dicen que soy estadounidense, yo soy de Los Ángeles, más pero soy aquí, en esta hora de Zapoteco, porque crecí con mis abuelos, crecí con mis tías, con mis papás, mis tíos, la verdad es una cultura que no me lo quitan, la verdad, porque la crecí aquí, la crecí allá. Cuando voy para allá, nomás he ido 3 veces, hay familia ahí esperándome, mi sobrino y la muerte tienen que regresar algún día a ver mi lengua, a ver mi cultura, a ver todo, ¿verdad? Pero yo no soy el único, recién pensaba que era el único que me sentía así un poco, ¿verdad? Pero poco a poco he estado conociendo a más jóvenes de mi chicos, mi hermano que no tiene 13 años, o personas que están en su medio y están bien. Y vamos viendo que nosotros es una resistencia estar aquí también. Y vamos buscando la comunidad, vamos intentando la comunidad, ¿verdad? Y poco a poco nos vamos encontrando como compañeros que están aquí conmigo. Entonces, por la resistencia, por el orgullo de donde vivimos, poco a poco nos vamos haciendo juntos, comenzamos a realizar, ¿verdad? Nosotros tenemos esta pasión de existir, porque es no nada más el gobierno estadounidense, lo que es de ser por eso en Los Ángeles, ¿verdad? Pero también el gobierno que ha estado prohibiendo de sectores en México, en Oaxaca, en México, ¿verdad? Y pues es algo bonito también saber que en los jóvenes implementa esa miradas que siempre han sido jóvenes que han luchado y nosotros tenemos el poder para ser algo, tenemos el poder para ser una comunidad y enseñarnos a uno a otro, ¿verdad? Entonces, lo que estaban diciendo ustedes es algo que me inspira mucho de saber que no más porque soy joven, no más porque le meto a todo lo que sea, pues el día que no tenemos el poder. Creo que ya hemos salido de esto, nomás que a veces se nos olvida o a veces se pone muy difícil. Pues agradezco mucho el trabajo que han hecho y también ahora que hay mucha otra, también nos sigue la lucha.
Yeah, thank you so much for the overtime. I mean, that's kind of like what you were saying, what I've been noticing a lot of because some of them are estamos reclamando la hoja tenía una súper diferente de la que esto que andaban reclamando persona and one of the ways has been to rechazar chicanidad, rechazar Yankee stuff, rechazar cosas, no, and I'm really curious to see like kind of hear your perspective on where that might go or like how we can handle it, because what happened at City Hall. That shit is something that I grew up with from Mexicans, from Chicanos, like being called prieto, being called like all these that shit. So I feel like it's something that it's like there, but we don't talk about it. I'm scared to.
I'm on that generation, and I'm not a Chicana, I've never been to be Chicana because the Chicana protected me the whole time. There was never a time when I was a great place to Chicana, so I never felt that. And you can read an essay in the kind of like to do like language, I've been free. Look it up on free through the regular site. And the one thing you really talk about that is, I mean, that's what it was, being rejected and having, you know, when people, if you say you're Oaxaqueño or you say you're Zapoteco and they're like, we can't be, you grew up in LA, then you can't be something. And people don't understand that we created our spaces. So like we created our spaces and we created our communities, our in like like it doesn't involve all the other Mexicans. So I think that rejection has actually helped create these spaces. That's why I said, you know, when the marches happened, we went not because there was like that hunger or that it was because we needed to show up and that's what we felt. So I can't tell you like in my heart how much I think that you're having a different experience. And it's still not a good one, but it's a more positive one than the ones that like I had growing up with my brothers. Because we all like kind of, and as a professor, I have students from Oaxaca and they're still reluctant to say that they're from Oaxaca. And when they finally say it, they're like, I haven't gotten past that yet. Like I haven't healed like from the that elder people placed on us from that same rejection they talked about. Like it's like they feel that they can tell me because I now say I'm Oaxaqueña, I'm something like that, I'm an indigenous scholar, talking about indigenous intellectual history. It's always been there. We have power, we have spaces, we created spaces of resistance. This is why I'm here with my colegas because they recognize that too. But now I feel really hopeful that the new generations of Oaxaqueños, including my daughters who are trilingual, they speak Zapoteco, that they're creating a new space for all these other Oaxaqueños, you know, to say, look, yeah, this, you know, just we're recognized, and even within ourselves, all of the weight of carrying, that's why it's so heavy. We're like, but I think that this is why now we're here, and this is why visualizing that happened in LA. My colleague that also Maureen helped make that happen. Without that inspiration from the 2006 movement, from knowing what we dealt with as Oaxaqueños, like I feel that that was actually cool for me to fight for those spaces and to continue fighting for those spaces and all the new exhibits that I'm working on, so.
That might be a good place to end up like this kind of stuff. Anybody got anything super press? Otherwise, you know, talk amongst ourselves. Yeah. Right. All right. Thank you all.
So what you promise when going to also be here to the house. Los regalos que yo tengo papel que vayan dentro de
Right. You know, like, yeah.
You parked outside. Thank you very much.
Where you at?
Now, for,
Everybody who is to the open now, everybody could just gather and guard him. Nobody will be. Pásate por la foto. Yeah, everybody who's here. Everybody who's here, wants to take a photo as a group. Please, so just go. Let's all go up there with him and take a photo. Thank you, Paul. They got all the office, yes. I thought it's probably like for your camera. You guys come in? We're still live, yeah, we're still live. Yeah.
No, I'm gonna leave it. No. Yeah.
And then it's the word, I don't want to sound it. I don't want to, I like how they took it from me. I'm gonna just let it keep going.
Very pretty. Very before your eyes. Thank you so much for the meeting and Porque ellos comenzaron ahorita a hacer como y en otro pero sí podría ser hecho